Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break IL, a look at speedrunning, game development, content creation, and everything in between. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for liking, commenting, all that kind of fun stuff. Honestly, I can't thank you enough. Really do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. In this episode, going to talk a little bit about social media, of all things. If you've at all been on Twitter in the past few weeks or even past few months, and this is the end of November here, or we're getting towards the end of November here in 2022, Twitter kind of seems like it's melting down a little bit. I don't know how to describe it. I got to tell you, it's never boring. Got to be honest with you on that spot. But Twitter's kind of been an interesting thing for speedrunners, and it got me thinking about places where we gather, where we hang out, where we have communities together, where we converse. And that actually is kind of a theme that's come up quite a bit in this podcast. And I think it's kind of like a primer, or at least maybe you know where I'm coming from, or at least things that appeal to me as a person who likes to get involved with different types of communities. I encourage you to listen to, it's the episode right after episode 21. So this is from a couple of years ago, and it was with Eon. And we chat quite a bit about what it takes to have a community that is a welcoming community, or I guess, or a community that shares the same values as you do. And the reason I bring this up is because I've kind of been looking for a place to talk about video games and speedrunning. And the reason I bring that up is because most of this is just my experiences, by the way. So I'm going to preface all this with just, these are my experiences. I don't have very many IRL family members or friends that do this. So like if I play a new game that I really geek out on, I don't really have a place to share that with other folks except for my online communities. And it's kind of interesting, just my own story. I didn't really get involved in online communities until I started speedrunning. And I know many people have grown up being online and being comfortable in places like Discord and things like that, where you can make connections and be able to converse with people. And that's kind of like your life, you know, your community. And so it took me a little while to warm up to these ideas that you can have just as meaningful relationships online as you can in real life. And so I just want to point that out there. So it might make me sound a little like a boomer, which is totally fine. I understand I'm late to the party in this, which is kind of interesting because I got on the internet at a very early age, news groups, different things like that. But back in the 90s, I remember when internet access first came around, I was very quickly to adopt. And I was a teenager at the time. So it probably hit me at a time where it was influential in my life. So, but interestingly enough, I didn't really what I would consider a friend until later on, until I got into speedrunning. So let's preface that whole thing with that. And what I'd like to do here is kind of like go through a rundown of my experience with different types of platforms and communities. And then maybe where do we go next? Because I'm not sure what the future of Twitter is going to look like. And for a good chunk of my speedrunning time, that's a place where a lot of us speedrunners were on. We would share things, we would converse, we would engage with one another. And that may not be the case moving forward. I don't know. I really, at this point, I'm not sure anybody knows, to be honest with you. So I think it's a good time to look at what currently exists, or at least my experience with some of these platforms, because there's a bunch of them, by the way, and I'm not even going to get to all of them. But here's just, I guess, some thoughts I've had as I visited these different types of communities and different platforms. And maybe where do we go next? What happens next? Is there even something that is next? I mean, that's a good question as well. So let's first start out with this, is that over the course of the past year, I've actually withdrawn a bit from social media in general. So if you are at all familiar, so how do you even find this podcast then? That's one of the few reasons that I continue to engage and try to post on social media, is to let people know about this podcast and, perhaps, some promotional reasons for this. Obviously, I'm not very good at it as well for promoting it. So just throw that out there as well. I do have a Facebook account, but I basically don't use it anymore. It used to be a place when I first got on a decade ago, probably, maybe even longer now, where I would share personal photos, mostly, maybe some comments here and there with friends and family. And then as my network grew, I started people that I would work with, or people that, you know, I had different working relationships with. I would friend those people on Facebook. And it got to be where I didn't quite even know who my community, or, you know, my network was anymore. And the things that I really got on Facebook for were seeing my friends and what they're doing and stuff no longer existed. So it's kind of interesting in that sense that a lot of my close personal friends, we've started, you know, text message groups or iMessage groups or Signal groups or any of those type of things. Signal's a chat app if you haven't used that one before. And I found that that's been my kind of my go-to as far as IRL friends and family. So can't really say much about speedrunning Facebook. I don't even know if there is a speedrunning community on Facebook. I'm sure there is of some sort. Let's start with YouTube. YouTube's kind of an interesting platform. I think it's great for like consumption of content. And if you're in the game, if you're in the environment of creating your own content, you can actually have some really interesting conversations and engagement, sending videos back and forth if you're a content creator and things like that. And there are, you know, YouTube comments, which, you know, come with their own caveats. And unfortunately, over the years, it's been just an incredible place for trolls. And so I don't read too much of the YouTube comments, but occasionally there are some interesting nuggets that get surfaced and people share, and some interesting ideas and stuff like that. But quite often, more than not, I try to stay away from the YouTube comments, even though there are some interesting tidbits and conversations that happen there. And kind of in that same vein, I think, I got to be honest, I've still engaged in Twitch chat. And I find, depending on what speedrunners or what communities I'm hanging out with, there's actually some really interesting conversations that can happen in Twitch chat. And if you're, let's say, if you mostly are primarily follow speedrunners, some really interesting things and nuggets of information come out of Twitch chat. Like everything that I'm going to go, there's always this caveat that there is trolling that's going to happen. And I got to be honest, I've been fortunate. I've never really been a victim of any sort of like harassment or trolling or anything like that. But I did experience this for some of my guests that came on the GDQ show that I used to host. And it literally broke my heart. And at the same time, I guess that's part of what comes with having a bit more, with having a bigger, wider audience when you're trying to engage in a place like that. So, but I find it fun and engaging. My consumption of speedrunning content has been diminished recently, just because of like work and some personal things that are happening in my life. But I still find it a place where I find it interesting and fun and always kind of engaging, to say the least. So never discount Twitch chat as a place to hang out if you're into speedrunning, if that's your thing. And a lot of times I don't even chat in Twitch chat. I just enjoy reading the comments and seeing how the streamer is engaging and creating conversation based off of that. Okay, so that's out of the way. I've always been aware of there's a speedrunning subreddit. And if you're not at all with Reddit, it's a kind of like a forum where people can post discussion topics or videos or any sort of content, and then you chat about it after then. And there's ranking there. So presume the most popular comments get, boosted up to the top of a subreddit or of an individual post. And speedrunning subreddit obviously comes with its pros and cons, to say the least. It's interesting to see the community there. And this has just been my observations over the past couple of years. But then recently I've actually started posting a little bit to see what kind of engagement happens there with the different types of topics. And the cross-section of people that exist or that are, engaging in the speedrunning Reddit subreddit are interesting. It kind of seems like there are definitely some speedrunners there, people I know and I'm familiar with. And then there's also a fair amount of speedrunning fans who I'm not quite sure that they actually speedrun themselves, but they are into this activity. And quite often, that seems like me a lot of times. I haven't grinded out a game now in months. And so I feel like I'm more of a fan right now than I am an actual speedrunner. And so I think it's interesting to see that perspective and that point of view engaging with their opinions and things like that on Reddit. The opinions vary wildly there. And I am familiar with some of the harassment and some of the trolling that has come out of some of the comments that have been made on Reddit. The interesting thing, and here's what I'm curious what people think about this, and I've noticed that when we're disagreeing with one another, text can be a really challenging medium to kind of figure out what the tone is of the message. And there are times where things can get miscommunicated or misunderstood very quickly. And I've noticed that's one thing that happens on Reddit quite often, is that there's a misunderstanding or a miscommunication based on what the perceived tone of the message is. And this happens on Discord too. And I don't really know a way to solve this. I know there are things you can do to hopefully, kind of express your tone a little better with emojis or, some of the acronyms you use, LOL, things like that. But I still find that's one of the limitations of a text medium to begin with. So like when we're conversing messages back and forth, things can easily get misconstrued, especially happens when we disagree with one another, which I always appreciate disagreement. I think that's how we become better people and come to better understand each other, is when we don't necessarily agree on things and can have empathy for one another's point of view. It's still, I find it a challenge when we're just posting things and trying to base our understanding off of, 2 sentences or something like that. So that's one of the issues that I found with Reddit. On the flip side of it, I'm finding out a lot of interesting things about runs that I never knew about on Reddit. Quite often, there's a lot of world records posted on Reddit, and it seems like a lot. It's not the actual runner who posts their world record. It's somebody from their community or somebody who found, the run really interesting, which I always find kind of interesting. And Reddit does have a tendency that the more popular games seem to get upvoted, which is totally understandable. They have big communities, and that's what people are interested in. So I totally understand that. The one that always kind of cracks me up, and one of the things that seems to go around a lot on Reddit, is this is the most amazing run ever. There's nothing else like it. It's the apex of speedrunning. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of pinnacles of speedrunning that happen on Reddit. Who would have thought? So that would just kind of crack me up. But interesting nonetheless. And I think if that's kind of your thing, if that's something you're looking for, Reddit might be a place for you if you haven't given it a try. It can be a kind of a lot to take in, to be honest with you. As somebody who's still just kind of trying to figure it out, there's a lot going on there. At the same time, it's kind of different than Discord, and we'll get to that here in just a little bit. The other place I wanted to mention was the speedrun.com forums, and those seem to be specific, to whatever leaderboard you're reading. So quite often a speedrun.com forum might just have a question about timing or some of the rules or things like that, and there's not a ton of extra interesting conversation, even on some of the most popular games. Apart from just some of those logistical questions or basic questions. And so I guess it kind of is what it is. It makes sense that most of the conversation there is based on whatever game that forum is attached to. So just something to mention though, that if you're looking for extra information or just kind of curious what some things are happening in that game, check out the leaderboards. There's not a ton, at least in my experience, that I've found on the leaderboards. Now I'm going to kind of the next thing I'm going to talk about is Instagram. And I really did enjoy Instagram, and I have enjoyed it. I shouldn't say enjoyed it less. I just have found myself not using it or looking at it as often. I would say probably for a couple of years, I would check Instagram once a day, and maybe now I check it once a week, maybe. But one of the things that I continue to enjoy about Instagram is that depending on what speedrunners you're following, you usually get fun, entertaining content that is targeted, that is about that speedrunner. And so I don't know, maybe there is, but I haven't gone and investigating, specific games, Instagrams. But, Mitch, for example, I'll follow Mitch Flower Power on Instagram, and a lot of his stuff is about his stream and Super Mario Brothers 3. But you can also see if he got accepted into GDQ or something like that, he might post about that. And so there's not a ton of conversation going on in the comments, but I think it's a great place if you want to stay up to date with the speedrunners that you enjoy or other people. There's also, it seems to be a really positive place more often. I shouldn't say really. It seems to be more positive than other places I have found some of our stuff. And we'll get to Twitter here in just a little bit, just to let you know. But it seems to be, for the most part, positive. The thing that's kind of driven me away from Instagram is the amount of ads that are served towards you and that are being targeted towards you. Almost seems a bit aggressive to me nowadays. I'm going to say a bit. It seems just aggressive. And that's the thing that's pushed me away from it. I don't follow too many people on Instagram. I think it's only a couple hundred. And I really do enjoy seeing updates from the speedrunners I want to see updates from. At the same time, you have to get through, 4 ads just to get to the content you want to see. And I got to be honest, that's kind of the thing that's driven me away. I will also say that Instagram's ads are surprisingly good. I've bought some stuff based off of the ad targeting me, and I'm glad I found out about that stuff. At the same time, I'm not sure I want to be advertised to that aggressively. So I guess use at your own risk. But the thing I did have found interesting about Instagram, I've seen a lot of people resharing or sharing things from TikTok on Instagram. And my thing I will say about TikTok, and that I haven't signed up for an account yet, but I've seen a lot of the content that gets reshared on Instagram and other places, even Twitter and stuff like that, is that there's some really interesting short form content being done on TikTok. And I'm not too familiar with the community yet, so I'm curious if speedrunners are finding a home on TikTok. I do really like some of these 60-second clips I'm seeing of a speedrunner unearthing some sort of clip or glitch that they didn't know existed, or that moment when they've gotten their PB or anything like that. And I do find that stuff kind of fun and interesting, and it's a bit disposable because you're kind of going through it quickly, but at the same time, that's one of the things I love about speedrunning, is seeing people succeed or having a terrible fail. Those kind of things are just really entertaining, to say the least. So I'm not sure if I'm going to sign up for an account. Maybe I will at some point. I know that as I'm trying to limit or, not be completely overtaken by social media in my life, I could see myself easily getting, just swept up in all the things that TikTok has to offer. So there you go. If you find some, maybe there's some places you have found on TikTok that you think are good places to share or to follow, things like that. And I'd be interested to hear them. I mean, let me know, comments or on Discord or on Twitter or whatever. That'd be kind of interesting. And speaking of Twitter, I think that kind of leads to where I came to for the idea for this episode, and that is Speedrun Twitter. And let's go over the backstory here a little bit on how, when I first started speedrunning, I guess I had already had a Twitter account for a while, but mostly just followed some journalists, and that's how I was getting a fair amount of my news. I engage with Twitter. Twitter is probably my primary social media network, even though I don't post very often, but I do find it interesting to know kind of where a lot of current conversation is going and things like that. And I found when I started following speedrunners, I made a thing where basically my Twitter was primarily speedrunners. So when I got on Twitter, it was actually a really good experience. I didn't see a lot of the kind of awfulness that people can be to one another on Twitter. And when you had speedrunners, a lot of the comments were or sharing, or the posts had a positive light to them. I won't say that they were all good, not everyone is complimenting everyone and stuff, but there was always a respectful and somewhat positive light to the things that speedrunners were talking about and sharing their frustrations with trying to get past something, or here's a clip, or here's what's going on in the speedrunning community. Maybe there's a hot topic for the day. Somebody was cheating, somebody got banned. So, but things that got shared in our community. And I have found Twitter to be one of the best places for that, because as we'll talk about in just a second, Discord is specific. You're creating a small community that doesn't broadcast the way Twitter does. When you throw out a post into the world on Twitter, anybody can pick it up. So let's say somebody from the Mario Odyssey community can post something up that somebody in the TurboGrafx-16 community they could see. That kind of interaction just isn't possible on Discord. And that's why I think Twitter has been so kind of vibrant and kind of alive for us speedrunners. And that's changed over the past couple of years, interestingly enough. But it's the thing that appealed to me in the first place, and why I chose to spend most of my time. If I was going to spend time on social media, Twitter was going to be the place. And I don't think things change. I think we as a society continue to find whatever steps are next. And that's kind of impacted some of the things that have happened on Twitter. But Twitter has also been a place where people just flat out get abused, and it literally makes my stomach churn, and almost sick to my stomach when I see some of the abuse that's happened on Twitter. And so that's one of the things you had to deal with if you wanted to engage and see what speedrunners are talking about and things like that. And there are many times where I thought, man, I don't think this is a good place to be. At the same time, there are a lot of people that I really liked and respected and would even call friends engaging there. So they're putting up with this, and maybe there's a reason they are. Maybe it's important for me to continue to follow. Maybe there are things that I can do outside of this. A lot of the charities I choose to support nowadays, Trevor Project being one of them, I didn't even know existed until I saw people talking about it on Twitter. So things that I know there's many different places to find these things, but that's just been my experience. And if and or when, I don't know, probably if Twitter isn't going to be around, do we need something to replace that? And I've seen many speedrunners posting about Mastodon and co-host, and I've signed up for accounts on both. And I am hoping that there is a future where we can engage the way we do on Twitter in some new form or fashion. Maybe one that has a little less freaking abuse around it. And I hope one of these platforms can take the lead with that. I mean, my ultimate hope would be that Twitter can get their act together and be a place where people feel comfortable engaging in it. I'm not quite convinced that's going to happen. In fact, I think pretty far from it. I'm hopeful. I hope that not hopeful. I wish that Twitter could figure it out and could be a place, because it's got, especially for speedrunners who want to share like a quick clip or share a quick comment about things that are happening in our community and stuff like that. Twitter's a great place for it. At the same time, you have to deal with, quite frankly, a lot of shit just to, just to engage in the way that you want to. So I'm not quite sure what the future is going to be. And I guess what I'm getting at here is, what do we do if Speedrun Twitter goes away? And I think there are these other platforms for places like this. Maybe Discord's going to be, I mean, obviously it's our place for right now, but like I said, to get that sort of like cross-pollination, to get people, interacting in different ways in different communities, maybe it's tough to do that. I don't know, but it feels like Discord may not be the way to get that sort of engagement and that sort of conversation happening. And the interesting thing, I guess, always about speedrunning too, is that we're so segmented even within the speedrunning community. Basically every game has like its own community, right? So it's tough to even see how it would work outside of something like Twitter. I'm rambling a bit, but I guess you can kind of see how much I've enjoyed my experience in certain aspects on Twitter with this community. So, and a lot of it, by the way, I don't post very much. A lot of me is just reading and resharing and getting perspective and insight on people's thoughts and stuff like that. A lot of social issues I wasn't quite aware of, or at least I didn't have the understanding that I do now because of what people have posted on Twitter and things like that. So that's my experience. I'm curious what's yours like, and what you would, what is next? I've talked about it a little bit, but I think Discord is so awesome and it's so great for these specific communities. One of my big issues with Discord is I find myself only fully engaged with like 3 servers. And for me, that's like basically the games that I moderate, like Castlevania Rondo of Blood. So not even just the Castlevania server, but a specific channel in there, TurboGrafx 16, the Bonk, and my own Discord server. And, and Splatterhouse and basically the games that I run, So I don't know how many like servers we can actively be engaged with at one time. I guess this is the issue with social media, right? Like, what is our capability as people, as humans? I know some are much more capable than others. And I would say that if, online is your primary source of interaction with people, it might be a little bit more easier easier for you to be engaged in more than a few places. But I know for me, I still find it challenging. And it's something, man, I yearn for it. I think one of the reasons I've kind of, please don't hate me, one of the reasons I've kind of enjoyed Reddit recently is because there's been some engagement there. I have found some topics that I found interesting. Others I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll just skip by. But there's been some interaction. And I think that's one of the things I love about Discord too, is I know, on the TurboGrafx 16 Discord all the time, people sharing hardware posts or what's coming in, what's a new homebrew that's out there. That's kind of stuff that's like interesting to me. And then if, the Bonk community is probably one of the most that I love that server the most, because, when a new strat happens or something, or maybe, somebody discovers something new, it gets shared. And that's the way we talk about it in there. Very specific and targeted towards that game. So I guess what's your preferred place? What's your preferred platform? And what's it going to be? Where's a good place for us in the future? I think one of the things I've observed, and I don't know if I'm going out too much on a limb here and saying this, that the social media landscape continues to change. If you think about what it was 10 years ago, or even 10 years before that, when we were, and this is before my time, but the SDA forums were a place where people, this is where speedrunners were hanging out. There's even some fun. You can even still look at some of these. There's the game fact forums, you know, what all the conversation that was happening there. It's interesting. And this is one of the things I love about watching some of the speedrunning history content that's out there on YouTube, is seeing where we've been and how we, you know, how we're able to move forward. Because that's one of the other issues about Twitter. Sometimes it's kind of tough to parse and save for later and make sure that that knowledge gets saved for the rest of us. And, you know, it's not always easy, to say the least. So what's next? What's next for us? I don't know. I wish I did, but I hope that we can continue to find a place to kind of gather as a community. And maybe it's going to be in-person events, you know, eventually. Obviously, that's not a place to save some of these. There's some really interesting conversation that happened that needs to be preserved. And so what'll be next? I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see and kind of observe. I hope that maybe this gets you to consider some of the networks that you're a part of. And, you know, always remember that I think anything in moderation, right? Like as you're finding time to spend with certain things, at least for me, I know some of these platforms are built with some kind of foundations that can be very addicting. And so it's always good, I think, to be conscious of that kind of stuff. But then also, so for some of us, this is the only way we can stay engaged with people is online, you know? So especially those who have, for those who have been immunocompromised, and I have some family members who are going through that right now, like they can't go outside. They can't do anything other than engage with people online. So this is their social interactions. So anyway, a lot of rambling, but I hope you find this interesting. I'm curious to hear what you might have to say, or maybe some future topics, but it'll be something I continue to talk about with people on the podcast. So anyway, thanks for listening to the ramblings, and let's see where we're going to hang out next. I'm curious to see, maybe I'll revisit this in like a year or 5 years from now. I hope I'm still doing the podcast 5 years from now. So anyway, thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free, subscribe, like, leave a comment, all that stuff people say at the end of a video. It honestly all goes a long way to help the podcast. Thank you so much. If you want to join us on Discord, we chat mostly about food, but occasionally we do talk about the stuff that's in the podcast. The link is in the show notes or in the description. Feel free. Come on by, join us. If you want to follow on Twitter, Sequence Break PC. Sequence Break PC. I post when I go live. It's kind of not at a set time, so if you want to see the live feed of the podcast, feel free, follow there. And finally, if you want to email, podcast@sequencebreakpodcast.com. Sequencebreakpodcast.com is also where you can find the backlog of all of the episodes. It's also on YouTube as well, so feel free, join in, have some fun. Thank you so much. I will see ya in the next one.